Martin Cole was the kind of chef people trusted without question, a quiet genius whose flawless dishes made strangers fall in love with a small seaside town, until the night his customers began collapsing at their tables. Greyhaven was the kind of town that people drove through on their way to bigger places, but often decided to stay in for a little while longer. It sat on the edge of the sea, where the waves rolled in with a slow, steady rhythm, and the streets smelled faintly of salt and freshly baked bread. Tucked between an old bookstore and a narrow alley lined with fishing nets stood a small restaurant with soft golden lights glowing against the evening air. The sign above the door read SeaSalt Bistro, and for the locals, it was more than just a place to eat. It was a part of their lives. Inside, the restaurant felt warm and welcoming no matter the weather. Wooden tables were polished to a gentle shine, and candles flickered in small glass jars. The scent of butter, garlic, and roasted herbs drifted through the air, drawing people in from the chilly streets. At the center of it all was Martin Cole, the owner and head chef. He moved through the kitchen like a conductor leading an orchestra, every motion quick and precise, every dish a carefully planned performance. People said Martin had a gift for turning simple ingredients into something unforgettable. Tourists who stumbled across the bistro often ended up staying longer in Greyhaven just to taste his food again. Martin had opened SeaSalt Bistro 10 years earlier, using his savings from years of working in high-end city restaurants. He chose Greyhaven because it felt untouched, a place where he could build something of his own without the noise of competition. From the beginning, his cooking set the restaurant apart. The lobster risotto became a local legend, the kind of meal people described to friends with wide eyes and eager hands. Regular customers knew that Martin's touch could elevate a humble bowl of clam chowder into something almost magical. The waiting list for Saturday nights grew so long that people called weeks ahead for a table. Despite the attention, Martin remained a quiet figure. He greeted guests with a polite smile and sometimes stepped out of the kitchen to thank diners for coming, but conversations rarely went beyond a few friendly words. He lived alone in a small cottage on the edge of town and was rarely seen outside of the restaurant. Most people accepted his reserved nature as part of his charm. To the staff, he was a demanding but fair boss, always focused, never raising his voice. They admired his dedication, even when he stayed late into the night perfecting a sauce or rearranging the spice racks until everything sat in perfect order. People loved to tell stories about Martin's talent, how he seemed to know exactly what a dish needed without tasting it. Customers left glowing reviews describing meals that felt like works of art. The town embraced him as one of their own, proud to have a chef of such skill hidden away on their quiet coast. Yet for all his success, Martin's eyes sometimes carried a distant look, as though his thoughts were stirring in places no one else could reach. No one questioned it. In Greyhaven, Martin was simply the brilliant chef who made food worth remembering, and SeaSalt Bistro was the heart of their little seaside world. The first sign that something was wrong came on a busy Friday evening in early spring. The restaurant was filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, the smell of roasted fish and warm bread floating through the air. Among the diners was a retired school teacher named Helen Marks, a woman who had eaten at SeaSalt Bistro almost every week since it opened. Halfway through her meal, she felt a strange bitterness on her tongue, something faint but noticeable. She mentioned it to the waiter, who quickly apologized and offered to replace the dish. Helen brushed it off, finished her dinner, and went home. That night, she woke up with a wave of nausea and a pounding headache. Doctors later called it a mild case of food poisoning, though they admitted nothing in her tests pointed to a clear cause. The incident might have been forgotten if it had stopped there, but a week later, a young couple celebrating their anniversary experienced something eerily similar. They ordered Martin's famous lobster risotto, took a few bites, and soon complained of dizziness. They left before dessert, pale and uneasy, and ended up at the local clinic with stomach cramps and weakness. Once again, medical tests revealed nothing conclusive. The kitchen was inspected the next morning, and everything appeared spotless. The seafood supplier confirmed that the day's catch was fresh. The staff whispered about bad luck, but the health inspector signed off without finding a single violation. As days passed, the pattern became harder to ignore. A businessman who stopped in for lunch collapsed in the parking lot moments after finishing his meal. A group of tourists reported a metallic taste in their drinks, though no traces of contamination were found. Each event was separated by just enough time to keep suspicions scattered. Some believed the wet was to blame, pointing to sudden shifts in temperature along the coast. Others thought it was coincidence, different people with different sensitivities. Through it all, Martin remained calm and attentive, personally visiting those who fell ill and offering free meals as a gesture of goodwill. His concern seemed genuine, and his quiet presence reassured the nervous regulars. Still, a low unease began to settle over the town. Some customers whispered about a curse, joking half-heartedly as they eyed their plates with a trace of doubt. Reservations dipped slightly, though the loyal patrons continued to fill the tables most nights. Martin responded by adding new dishes to the menu, each one more inventive than the last, as if determined to remind people why they had fallen in love with the bistro in the first place. He greeted guests with the same careful smile, worked with the same steady precision, and stayed long after closing to scrub every corner of the kitchen himself. No one wanted to believe that SeaSalt Bistro, the pride of Greyhaven, could be the source of danger. The illnesses remained a puzzle with no clear answer, a mystery that lingered like the faint taste of salt in the air, unsettling yet impossible to pin down. The storm rolled in on a Saturday evening, a heavy curtain of rain that turned the streets slick and shiny under the glow of the lamps. Despite the weather, SeaSalt Bistro was packed. The soft glow of candles reflected off wet windows as customers settled into their tables, eager for the comfort of Martin's cooking. The sound of waves crashing against the nearby pier mixed with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, creating a cozy shelter from the wild night outside. Martin moved through the kitchen with his usual quiet intensity, sleeves rolled up, knife flashing in steady rhythm. To the staff, it was a typical busy night, the kind of rush they had mastered many times before. As the first courses left the kitchen, the room buzzed with appreciation. Diners leaned over steaming bowls of seafood chowder, laughing as they warmed themselves against the storm. Plates of roasted fish and glistening risotto made their way from the kitchen to eager tables, each dish carrying the unmistakable scent of butter and herbs that had made Martin a local legend. Outside, thunder rumbled low across the sea, but inside the bistro, everything felt safe and inviting. Then, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. A man at the corner table rubbed his forehead and frowned, his spoon pausing midway to his mouth. Across the room, a young woman set down her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed it to her stomach. Within minutes, 2 more diners complained of sudden dizziness. At first, the staff thought it might be the heat or the storm pressing down on the building, but the symptoms spread with alarming speed. One guest stood abruptly, knocking over a chair before collapsing to the floor. Another clutched the edge of a table, face pale and lips dry, before sinking into her companion's arms. The lively chatter dissolved into cries for help. Chairs scraped against the floor as people rushed to steady those who were struggling to breathe or sit upright. A waiter shouted for someone to call an ambulance while others hurried to bring water, their hands shaking. The storm outside made the night feel even more claustrophobic, the pounding rain masking the wail of approaching sirens until emergency lights flashed against the glass. Paramedics burst through the door, weaving through overturned chairs to reach the victims. The restaurant was evacuated table by table, the wet wind from the open door mixing with the sharp smell of fear. Martin emerged from the kitchen just as the last guests were being escorted out. His chef's coat was perfectly clean, his expression strangely calm despite the chaos around him. He stood near the entrance, watching silently as stretchers rolled past and staff members exchanged frantic whispers. Some noticed the way he didn't rush to explain or defend, how he didn't seem surprised at all. Outside, as the rain soaked his hair and streaked down his face, Martin remained motionless, eyes fixed on the departing ambulances. The once warm and bustling bistro now sat dark and silent, its golden lights reflecting off the wet pavement like fading embers of a night no one in Greyhaven would forget. The investigation began before the rain-soaked streets of Greyhaven had even dried. Health officials and detectives sealed off SeaSalt Bistro, photographing every corner of the dining room and kitchen. Reporters crowded outside the police barricades, their umbrellas forming a restless sea of black and gray. Locals stood behind them, whispering theories and clinging to the hope that the beloved restaurant would be cleared of blame. Inside, forensic teams moved with quiet efficiency, swabbing countertops, testing water samples, and collecting every ingredient they could find. The kitchen, usually filled with the warm smells of butter and garlic, now carried the cold scent of disinfectant and damp steel. At first, nothing made sense. The seafood supplier's records were clean, and no sign of spoiled ingredients appeared in the storage rooms. Gas lines were checked, but no leaks were detected. Surveillance cameras were pulled for review, capturing hours of footage of staff preparing meals with ordinary care. Yet, as investigators combed through the recordings, one detail caught their attention. Early that afternoon, hours before the dinner rush, Martin had arrived alone. He moved through the kitchen with the same practiced precision he showed during service, but his actions were oddly deliberate. Instead of unpacking deliveries or checking equipment, he spent long stretches adjusting spice jars and opening containers that other staff rarely touched. The discovery prompted a deeper search. Forensic analysts began testing every bottle and jar, no matter how harmless it seemed. Days later, the results revealed something chilling. A small tin labeled as a custom herb blend contained traces of a rare, fast-acting compound. The substance was difficult to detect and broke down quickly once ingested, explaining why earlier medical tests on the victims had shown nothing conclusive. It was not a common kitchen chemical, nor was it something that could be purchased accidentally. Whoever placed it there had done so with knowledge and intent. Detectives brought Martin in for questioning. He arrived without resistance, wearing a pressed shirt and a calm expression that unsettled even the most seasoned officers. When asked about the compound, he claimed it was part of an experimental seasoning he had been developing for a new dish. His explanation was careful but thin, offering no details about where he had obtained it or why no one else knew of its existence. Investigators searched his small seaside cottage, hoping for clues that might explain his strange calm. What they found was far more disturbing than anyone expected. Inside a locked drawer, they uncovered a leather-bound notebook filled with names, dates, and carefully written notes about customers. Some pages contained compliments about regular patrons, but others carried cryptic remarks about those who had once complained about their meals or left critical reviews online. Phrases like, "He needs to learn respect," and "a lesson in taste" were scrawled in neat handwriting beside certain names. Combined with the surveillance footage and the chemical evidence, the picture became impossible to ignore. Martin, the celebrated chef of Greyhaven, had not been an unfortunate bystander. He had been selecting his victims with quiet precision, hiding his plan behind the comforting aroma of his celebrated dishes. The trial that followed became the biggest event Greyhaven had ever seen. Reporters filled the courthouse each morning, their cameras flashing as Martin Cole was led inside in a crisp gray suit instead of his familiar chef's whites. People who once applauded his cooking now gathered to hear every detail of how a celebrated chef could turn his talent into a weapon. The courtroom itself smelled faintly of salt from the sea air drifting through open windows, a quiet reminder of the town that had trusted him. Prosecutors presented their case with careful precision, laying out a timeline that linked the mysterious illnesses to Martin's own actions. They showed receipts for rare chemicals ordered under false names. Tiny amounts of additives that could cause sickness without leaving a clear trace. They revealed security footage of Martin lingering in the kitchen long after closing, adjusting spice jars and mixing ingredients in ways no recipe required. Witness after witness took the stand. Former employees spoke of late nights when Martin insisted on working alone, claiming he needed space to perfect the flavors. Regular customers described the meals that had made them ill, recalling subtle changes in taste that seemed harmless at the time. A forensic expert explained how the substance found in Martin's private spice containers could be absorbed quickly into food and vanish almost completely in the body. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of deliberate planning, a man who turned the intimacy of a shared meal into an instrument of harm. The defense argued that the chemical was part of an experimental dish and that the illnesses were coincidental. They reminded the jury that no one had died and that Martin had expressed concern for his patrons, even visiting some of them in the hospital. But the prosecution countered with the discovery that silenced the room a worn notebook found in Martin's cottage. Inside were pages of names, dates and cryptic notes about specific customers, comments about complaints, negative reviews, and even small slights such as sending a dish back to the kitchen. Some entries ended with a single word written in careful script: lesson. As the trial stretched on, the town's memory of the warm, soft-spoken chef began to blur. The man who once charmed tourists with his flawless dishes now sat motionless, eyes fixed on the floor, giving nothing away. When the jury finally delivered their verdict of guilty on multiple counts of attempted poisoning, a collective shiver seemed to pass through the courtroom. Martin remained still as the judge sentenced him to life in prison, his face unreadable as though the outcome meant nothing to him. SeaSalt Bistro never reopened. The building, once filled with light and laughter, became a silent shell overlooking the restless sea. Visitors sometimes paused outside, peering through the dusty windows where candles once glowed, trying to imagine how a place built on hospitality could hide so much darkness. In Greyhaven, the name Martin Cole became a cautionary echo, a reminder of how easily admiration can turn to fear when trust is betrayed.